Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we're diving into a powerful and emotional story, one that begins not with a hero, but with a desperate cry, hidden behind the walls of a small home in ancient Egypt. Imagine a world ruled by fear, where a cruel king's word meant life or death for an entire nation. A place where every newborn Hebrew boy was seen as a threat and had to be eliminated. Now, pause for a moment. What would you do if you were a mother in that world, holding a baby boy in your arms, knowing that if anyone found out, he could be taken from you forever? This is the story of Moses in the basket, a tale of faith, sacrifice, danger, and destiny. But more than that, it's about a mother's courage, a child's miracle, and how a single act of hope changed the course of history. As you watch, you'll be taken deep into the heart of ancient Egypt, where the mighty Pharaoh ruled with an iron fist, and the Hebrew people lived in chains. Life was hard. Every day brought a new struggle. But even in the darkest times, a spark of light was beginning to rise. Our story begins with a woman named Jochebed, a Hebrew slave and mother of 3. Her life was filled with fear, but also fierce love. When she gave birth to her youngest son, she looked into his tiny eyes and knew she couldn't let the world take him. For 3 months, she kept his existence hidden. She hushed his cries, covered his movements, and prayed that no soldier would hear. But babies grow. They cry louder. They wiggle and stretch and demand to be seen. And soon, hiding him was no longer an option. What she did next is both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. She took a basket, woven tightly with reeds and coated with tar to keep the water out, and placed her baby inside. She whispered a final lullaby, kissed his forehead, and carried the basket to the edge of the Nile River. Her hands trembled, her heart raced, and with one last prayer, she set the basket into the water, watching as the current began to carry her son away. Imagine that moment, her baby, floating alone on a vast river. Crocodiles lurk beneath the surface. Egyptian guards patrol nearby. The sun beats down from above, and reeds sway in the breeze. Anything could happen. Everything could go wrong. But here's the twist. This child was no ordinary baby. This was Moses, the very one who would one day rise to challenge Pharaoh himself. But right now, he was just a tiny boy, drifting into the unknown. And who would find the basket? Would it fall into the wrong hands? Would the baby survive? Or would fate step in with an unexpected turn? Stay with me, because what happens next is something you'll never forget. Let's step deeper into this journey, into the shadows of ancient Egypt, into the heartbeat of a mother's sacrifice, and the quiet strength of a child chosen for something greater than anyone could imagine. This is just the beginning. The river has carried Moses into danger, but destiny is only beginning to stir. The basket drifted quietly, barely making a ripple on the surface of the Nile. The soft cry of baby Moses rose and fell with the wind, unheard by most, but not by all. Tall papyrus reeds lined the riverbanks like silent sentinels, and behind them, danger always lurked. At any moment, something or someone could spot the basket. A soldier, a predator, even the strong current itself. The mother, Jochebed, stayed hidden nearby. Her eyes locked on that fragile vessel as it floated further away from her reach. Her heart was breaking, but she knew this was the only way to give her son a chance at life. Still, that kind of pain, the fear, the helplessness, it changes a person forever. But let's pause for a second and think about why the river had to be her choice in the first place. Egypt was not just powerful, it was ruthless. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, had seen the Hebrew people grow in number and strength, and that terrified him. His solution? An unthinkable command. Every baby boy born to the Hebrews must be thrown into the Nile. It was a way to crush a people's future before it could even begin. And yet, in trying to erase hope, Pharaoh unknowingly helped shape the very hero who would one day confront him face to face. The Nile wasn't just a river. In Egypt, it was life. It flowed through the heart of the empire, feeding crops, powering trade, and connecting cities. But on this day, it also carried a secret wrapped in a cloth, placed gently into a floating cradle. That cradle didn't just carry a baby, it carried a promise, one that even Jochebed couldn't fully understand. Would this tiny child grow up safe? Or would he be discovered and destroyed like so many others before him? And then something unexpected happened. Further downstream, the palace walls shimmered in the heat of the sun. Pharaoh's daughter, a young princess, had come down to the river to bathe. She wasn't alone. Her attendants stood nearby, chatting quietly. As she stepped into the water, her eyes caught a strange sight tucked in the reeds. A basket, floating, still, and somehow she felt drawn to it. She motioned for her servant to fetch it. Slowly, carefully, the basket was pulled from the water and brought to her. The princess leaned in and gasped, but what she saw, and what she chose to do next, would defy everything her father had commanded. This was no ordinary moment. This was the beginning of something that would shake Egypt's future. And Moses, he was still just a baby, unaware of the path that was forming before him. The princess looked down into the basket and saw a tiny baby crying softly, his face red from the sun, his little fists clenched in the air. But there was something about him, something that made her heart soften instantly. She knew right away this was one of the Hebrew babies. She wasn't blind to her father's law. She knew the risk. If Pharaoh found out, there would be consequences. Yet, in that moment, she didn't see a threat. She saw a helpless child who needed her. And despite everything she'd been taught, despite the fear her father had spread, she couldn't look away. Meanwhile, not far off, a young girl had been watching. Miriam, Moses' older sister, had followed the basket from a distance, hiding among the tall grass. When she saw the princess lift her brother from the water, her heart jumped. But fear quickly followed. What would she do? Would she hand him over to the guards? Would she call for help? Miriam's mind raced. She had to do something. She had to speak up. Back in the palace, a very different scene was unfolding. Pharaoh sat in his court, surrounded by advisors, speaking of power, control, and fear. He believed that crushing the Hebrews would protect Egypt's future. He saw their growing numbers as a threat to his throne. His heart had grown cold. The suffering of innocent families meant nothing to him. As far as he was concerned, a baby like Moses was a danger, not a child. Outside the palace walls, Hebrew families lived in fear and silence, holding their babies close, hoping to go unnoticed. Mothers whispered prayers no one could hear. Fathers worked harder, heads down, spirits heavy. And all the while, one tiny boy now rested in the arms of Pharaoh's own daughter. Miriam stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step felt like a risk, like one wrong word could destroy everything. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. "Should I find someone to take care of the baby for you?" she asked the princess. For a moment, there was silence. The princess looked up, startled, unsure of who this brave girl was, but something about Miriam's calm eyes held her attention. The princess didn't ask where she came from, or how she knew. She just nodded. Without wasting a second, Miriam ran, faster than she ever had before, back to her home. She burst through the door, breathless, shouting for her mother. Jochebed didn't ask questions. She just followed. Her baby was alive. That was all she needed to know. Moments later, she stood before the princess, pretending to be just a nurse, her heart screaming with emotion, but her face quiet. The princess handed Moses to her gently, unaware she was placing the child back into his mother's arms. Back in the palace, whispers began to spread. A Hebrew child had been taken in by the royal family. Some servants were shocked, others suspicious. If Pharaoh found out, there would be trouble. His own daughter breaking his decree? Hiding the very life he ordered to be destroyed? It was dangerous, but the princess was firm. She named the child Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." And with that name, a new chapter was beginning. But the danger wasn't over. Every day that passed, Moses grew stronger, louder, more curious. He would be raised among Pharaoh's own people, in the heart of the enemy's house. And none of them knew, none of them could imagine, what this child would one day become. As Moses grew up within the palace walls, he lived a life completely different from the one he was born into. Draped in fine linen, taught by the best scholars, and surrounded by luxury, he was treated as royalty, Pharaoh's grandson in the eyes of many. But deep inside, something never quite felt right. There were questions that no one could answer, feelings he didn't understand. Why did the palace guards look at him with unease? Why did some of the Egyptian nobles whisper behind his back when they thought he wasn't listening? Then one day, while walking near the outskirts of the palace grounds, Moses saw something that would change everything. 2 Egyptian guards were beating a Hebrew slave. The man cried out, weak and helpless, and something inside Moses snapped. For the first time, he truly saw the world he lived in, not from the top, but from the eyes of those suffering at the bottom. The pain, the cruelty, the injustice, and it wasn't just anyone being beaten. It was a man who looked like him. A man from the people he somehow felt connected to, even though he didn't fully understand why. He began to ask questions, quietly at first. He started watching the Hebrew workers more closely, seeing how they lived, how they were treated. The more he saw, the more it burned inside him. Then came the moment he couldn't ignore. In a moment of rage and confusion, Moses struck one of the guards during another violent beating. Struck him so hard, the man didn't get up again. Panic hit instantly. Moses looked around. No one was supposed to see. But the next day, whispers spread like wildfire. People knew. And worse, Pharaoh knew. The boy he had raised under his roof, the one he called grandson, had killed an Egyptian in defense of a Hebrew slave. To Pharaoh, this wasn't just betrayal, it was treason. Suddenly, everything changed. The safety Moses had always known disappeared overnight. He wasn't just in danger, he was now a wanted man. His identity, his past, his future, they all collided in a single heartbeat. Moses was no longer Prince of Egypt. He was something else now, something dangerous, something hunted. And somewhere deep inside, he began to realize his life was never meant to stay in the palace. His real journey was only just beginning. Moses fled Egypt with nothing. No riches, no title, not even a clear future. The desert stretched out before him like an endless sea of silence. Each step away from the palace felt like shedding a life that was never truly his. He wandered alone, unsure if he would ever find peace or forgiveness. He had been raised as a prince, but his heart now carried the weight of a man who had taken a life, who had seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. The Hebrews were his people. He knew it now. Their pain had become his own. Years passed. Moses settled in a quiet land called Midian, far from Pharaoh's reach. He became a shepherd, married, and tried to build a simple life. But deep inside, that fire never left him. One day, while tending sheep near a mountain, something caught his eye. A bush, burning, but not consumed. The flames danced, but the leaves remained untouched. He stepped closer, and then a voice, powerful, steady, and unlike anything he'd ever heard, called his name, Moses. That moment changed everything. God spoke to him through the burning bush. He was being called back. back to Egypt, back to the place he had fled. He wasn't just being asked to return, he was being chosen to lead, to free the Hebrews from slavery, to stand before Pharaoh and demand freedom for a people long forgotten. It felt impossible. Moses was no longer a prince, he was a shepherd, a fugitive. But he couldn't ignore the calling. This wasn't about his past anymore. It was about a future he had to fight for. So he returned. He stood in the grand halls of Pharaoh, face to face with the very power that had raised him, and now wanted him gone. He spoke not as a prince or a slave, but as a messenger. "Let my people go." And thus began a clash that would shake the empire. Plagues, warnings, miracles, one after another, until even the mighty Pharaoh had no choice but to listen. But just as the Hebrews began their journey to freedom, just when the path seemed clear, the final twist came. Pharaoh changed his mind. His army thundered after them, the Red Sea ahead and death behind. And in that moment of panic, the same Moses who once floated helplessly in a basket now stood tall, ready to part the waters. But what happened next was something no one, not even Moses, could have seen coming. As the roaring Egyptian army closed in, the Hebrew people stood trapped between Pharaoh's chariots and the deep waters of the Red Sea. Panic spread like fire. Children cried. Mothers held their babies tighter. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. All eyes turned to Moses, the same man who once floated helplessly in a basket, now standing as their only hope. With the staff in his hand and faith in his heart, Moses raised his arms toward the sea. The winds howled, the sky darkened, and then something miraculous happened. The waters began to pull apart, rising into towering walls on both sides, leaving a dry path straight through the middle. No one had seen anything like it. The people didn't hesitate. Led by Moses, they stepped forward, walking through the sea as if it were solid ground. Every footstep was a mix of fear and faith. Behind them, the Egyptians charged in, chasing with full force. But just as the last Hebrew stepped onto safe land, Moses turned back. The waters crashed down, swallowing the chariots and closing the path forever. The Hebrews were free. For the first time in generations, they stood on land not ruled by chains or fear. They had escaped Egypt, not just physically, but spiritually. Moses, once a lost and confused man, had become the leader of a nation. The boy saved by a basket had fulfilled the purpose he was born for. The subplots, the courage of his mother, the quick thinking of his sister Miriam, the mercy of Pharaoh's daughter, all led to this moment. Their choices, small as they seemed, became the foundation of a greater story. And now, with freedom ahead and Egypt behind, the journey was far from over. The desert would bring new trials. The people would struggle, doubt, and fall. But this part of the story, Moses in the basket, was the beginning of everything. It was about trust in the face of fear, purpose born from pain, and how even the most fragile life can carry the weight of a nation. So, when you think about destiny, faith, or the meaning behind impossible moments, remember the baby who floated down the Nile and grew to split the sea. Some stories begin in silence, but end with the world watching.